And ultimately, like I've been saying in the past days, it's not how you do it, it's how it ends up looking like what really matters, and how creative you are in using these quote unquote simple tools, right? So, we're going to start with an aerial shot here that I'll say it right now. This fancy Nuke comp in here was not done by me. Was done by Johnny Allen, who you've met and talked about materials, some fancy materials in 3D Max and using V-Ray. But he was kind enough to organize it for us in groups in here, so we can go through the basic concepts of what he did, or what we typically do either in After Effects or in Nuke, to integrate CG into helicopter footage. You'll see it also addresses one of the questions someone asked yesterday about whether we have our EXRs with all the passes in them or not, right? You can see that we don't. We have all masks in here, and we actually don't have any passes other than the main pass. There's no need for it, because it rendered pretty sweet already as it was. So that's the main pass, right?
More of like what happens when once we bring the data in and we know that we have to put a couple real people in a shot, and how we would go about integrating them in properly. So this is like a combination of the thing you just saw. I'm not going to do the exporting and all that stuff. I've already got all my nulls in here, and I'll just kind of turn on and off some of these layers to show you what's happening. So we basically have these couple people right here, and if I were to isolate them, you can see them right there. I can move my playhead. You can see that they're staying stuck. Turn that off. Takes a little bit longer on these ones, but they're in the right spot. They're from our library. We have a pretty extensive library of footage that we have gathered through the years, and it's actually getting a little bit old because some of the stuff was acquired with like older methods. We have the red camera now. We really need to talk about like updating our library with either newer things. Like sometimes you'll see in some of our library items like people still using like flip phones and all that. It's not exactly as there's even a guy that we still have that reads the newspaper all the time.
Well,
we
should keep him because they're going to be hipsters pretty soon.
That's true. What's old is new. Flip phones are cool. So,
like cool people from the 80s and the 90s.
So what's happening here is we basically will do anything we can to integrate them in as best as possible. If I were to take and turn and isolate this layer right here, you can see this is a reflection. And it's maybe a little bit hard to see, but once I turn the transparency off and I turn the layer on and off, you can see that it's just adding a little bit of realism to where their feet are there. If you were to hit the scale function here, you can see that all it is -100 right there. And you might move the layer up and down a little bit to, depending on the strength of the reflection, to make sure it doesn't look like they're it's way far away from them, or that they're, optically, realistically speaking, their feet would be on top of what that reflection is. We'll add some blurs to it to just make sure that it looks like it's integrating with the shot. In this instance right here, this is a shadow that is built to match the shadows that are seen throughout the space. You can see these seats here and other geometry is casting shadows on here. So if I were to turn these off and on, again, just another added bit of realism to tie it in. There's an example that I'll go into a little bit more in detail with this, is that one thing you want to try and eliminate when possible is double shadows. I mean, we'll go so far as to say you got to do it all the time. because it'll really kill the realism. So what I went and did in here, I have a guide layer turned on. It's not the guide layers you can use as reference in templating in After Effects, so that you can still have it pre-composed, but it doesn't contribute to the render. So I went in and I essentially just masked out some of these areas where where it would be doubling up. Is it perfect? No, but it does a good enough job of making it so they don't look like they're all piling up.
It's detail stuff, right? It's stuff that not a lot of people are going to notice, especially depending on the length of the shot and things like that. Could you use the shadow pass? You could also use the shadow pass if you had rendered it, right? But you can also make it way more complicated if you try getting fancy with all those things than it needs to be, right? Because this shot's going to last 2 seconds on screen, and you really just want to make sure that people read like they're they're stuck to the ground, they have their grounding shadows, and if there's direct light, you want to have their long shadows and all that. Another thing to be careful about to that point, and using library people so close to the camera like this, in a camera that is panning up or that is pushing in and going over people, is that these are flat, right? And they start to fall apart once the camera goes over their shoulder, and then the guys look the same. You're not seeing their shoulders, you're not seeing the tops of their heads, and then the camera keeps going up, 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 up. So be careful with that. Be careful with the crazy moves. I mean, I know someone asked, on day one about doing crazy cameras. Like, unless you really want to, don't do it.
I'll show you a quick example here. Well, this is the example rendered out, and this first frame looks great, huh? Just to quickly explain what this is. This has some real smart motion blur applied to it. In the first frame, when it's calculating what it needs to do, it's just going to go screwy because it doesn't know how to gauge the vector.
There's no reference. There's no reference. There's no previous frame, so it's just freaking out.
Okay, so this is a render of that other one right here. I'll let it play down. So you can see it helps because I actually am using the footage to drive the shadow, and it adds the realism. The guy picks his foot up. It actually looks like she picks her foot. She moves around a little bit. It looks pretty realistic. This is also another good example of the camera, because this camera actually is a little bit crazy. It's picking up and moving, and yet these people still seem like they're more or less where they should be. We talk sometimes about scale when you're placing people, and in a shot like this, it might be a little hard to determine at the beginning what their scale is. But if you a little trick, and you guys may know this from doing renders or whatever, is that when your horizon's more or less flat, most people's heads look like they're kind of in the same spot. If you're taking an eye-level camera, you'll be able to kind of gauge when you see everyone's heads that are standing kind of like around the same spot. It's a good, if you don't have any other data to suggest otherwise.
Another thing to do that is very easy, that anyone can do without being a wizard, is just put boxes that are the average height, render a matte of that in different locations, and give it to a compositor so they can start using that as their gauge.
We call them people placers. The other thing that we'll do at times is if we don't have the people placer, the process I showed you when you're saving out nulls, you can make one that's roughly 6 foot high on top of wherever their feet are supposed to be too. So, and that should give you enough info. I mean, obviously not every person's going to be 6 feet tall, so you can kind of use that as, oh, that person's 5'6". They'll be a little shorter than the person next to him. So, a couple of things that I'll just wrap up on talking about for the integration in this is, if I've got in this shadow pass here, there's a number of effects that have been applied to it. This footage was shot a while ago and it was pretty noisy, so we put on it's on the shadow. You can't tell it as much here. The reason it's actually still on this layer is because in many ways you get the main key done. You then you just start duplicating layers and just moving things around. So sometimes you'll forget to turn things off. I probably don't need that effect turned on there, but there will be some curves that are done to, let me just turn these off. So and I can show you that this transparency mode is also at 26%. So if I turn this all the way up, you can see that, I'll zoom in a little here. You see that's the footage. You can see where they're being matted out right here by that that pre-comp mat that I built to prevent the double shadows. So if I turn these curves back on, that just crushes it down. So now I've got more or less my shadow that would then need to be modulated down here to be something like this 26%, which seemed to work for me. This one can be a little tricky. I'll use this transform effect, and I should probably show you this for the curves. I just brought the whites way down. Transform, this can be a dance in terms of finding the right combination of scale heights and skewing and skew axis and all that. And I've done it enough times where I kind of know what works for those. And it's not going to work in all cases. There's some footage where you get and you want a particular shadow. It's just not going to happen. But kind of lucked out with this one. It worked out. Do a little fast blur just to further integrate with the other shadows that I can see around the area over here. And then I'll do more of a color correction right here. So if I were to go into I don't think I did anything with the reds, but the greens, I brought them up a little bit, especially in the darks, and the blues, I brought them up a little bit too. A little trick that I like to do a lot of times is I will hover over things, and I'll sort of look, if you see up in the top corner here, what the RGB values are. So if you're like looking around your scene and you see that, oh, okay, this is pegging at, let's just round off 60, 65, and 60 for my RGB values. Then you want to go over here and just make sure that these values are looking similar. You can certainly eyeball it, but sometimes when you're getting really, really nuanced, with things, you might want to have a little RGB sort of, helper when you can.
There's a question online about whether or not you guys use real people in backgrounds.
Real people in backgrounds? As it relates to versus CG people?
I'm assuming so, yeah.
Okay.
We just did. There was. It all depends, right? 3D people in the distance and for a crowd are just easier to manage. There's not compositing that needs to be done. You can brute force them, or you can just render them in the main plate. So some of the tricks that we do is like, originally we thought that when you have a crowd, like everyone needed to be animated, but you really don't need to. You can literally have 80% of the figures stuck in time, and then like the other 20 actually animate. Obviously, there's a lot of light already, so your subjects are going to be lit too much already. So with the camera settings, you expose it properly, and then you have to start adding more light on top of your subjects, right? And make sure that the light that you're adding to your subjects is strong enough to go over the lighting that you have to light the whole studio. So that's really the basic concept of what to do, because if you have stronger light, if you don't have strong enough light to even out the floor and the walls, then you're going to get all these hard shadows everywhere. You're going to have a very hard time keying things. And it's all going to depend on your shot. So as you can see, we move the lights sometimes because we don't care how the left of the screen is lit because we're not seeing it, right? And so we needed a light from the top. So we use one of the long lights to get that light from the top for the character. And you can use reflectors and all that stuff. So you'll find that when you start doing research of professionals that do this, there's no book that tells the rules of how to do this for any of what we do.
Then this is where I just did a basic. This is just basic curves, a little bit of contrast. I think I brought the greens down a little bit. Yeah, I brought the greens down a little bit. That's pretty much all there was to it. Nothing dramatic yet. The next thing was doing this light effect. This was actually pretty fun. Trying to experiment with the looks and really land on something that looks cool and dramatic and somewhat realistic of what a sparkly LED sculpture like this might look like. So this is one time we were able to leverage a multi-mat from Max. Let's see. So that's basically what it looks like. So basically the red is the foreground LEDs and the green is the background LEDs.
So the story behind that was when we were discussing with the senior artist we had a conference call with Howe, one of our senior artists in New York. It's like, hey, we need to make that stuff sparkle, right? And but the camera moves a little bit and in other shots. So because there's so many of these elements that move in front of other elements, we in theory couldn't really do just a matte of all of them because there would have no depth, right? So all the sparklies would be the same size or the same color, and you couldn't really do it to look right. So we decided to basically split the back and the front in two and have two masks. So you can do the back a little different than the front, and at least when the camera moves, it would have some parallax.
Yeah, that was extremely helpful. It really helped us sell some of those shots with the turning and rotating.
Did you just figure out why we did it?
Yeah, I'm glad you taught me right now. I had no idea. I was like, sounds like a good idea, sure. So the cool thing about the way the multi-mats is the set map effect. Let's see. You can use to just pull out. If I shut this off, you have the greens and the reds, but I only wanted the front for this particular shot, so I was able to set the set mat to the red channel, and it all leaves is the red channel. And then then I was able to fill that with sort of the color I wanted for the LEDs. And then when I put on the Star Glow effect, which is a Tropico plugin, I can tell the Star Glow that I really only want the input channel to be on the blues. And since those blues are so saturated, when it's all laid together, it really only puts a Star Glow on the LEDs. It doesn't, there's not too much other areas where it's too bright, but you don't really see a Star Glow necessarily yeah, I'm pointing out at the screen like you guys can see my hands. It doesn't, most of the parts of the other image aren't as bright. It actually applied a little bit of Star Glow here, which, probably because there's a little bit of specularity there. But in the final render with the blur and stuff, you don't really see it.
We could always mask that out too.
And the one last thing I did to have it appear animated is I actually used a fractal noise, which is something that can be generated right within After Effects, which is pretty much just an animated digital noise. And I think I rotated 90 degrees so it goes up. But that is a Lumimat, so wherever that fractal noise was white, it is where you're going to see the LEDs. So it kind of gives that random motion and looks like the LEDs are shutting on and off and twinkling and kind of rising up. And that's just something that can be generated within a couple steps in After Effects and just put it on as a Lumimat. And I think that really helps sell it. And I thought it came out pretty cool.
Yeah, and that is one of my single favorite effects in After Effects. I think someone asked the other day about how you would do God rays and all that. Like you can just have that thing evolve a little bit and move a little bit, and it's just such a versatile thing. Whether it's coming down to adding a little bit of grit to something, or I use it all the time. So fractal noise. There's actually a newer one called turbulent noise, which Adobe says you should try to be using turbulent noise more than fractal noise. Maybe I'm not getting it. It just doesn't seem to do a whole lot different, but maybe you love it, and if you know why it's a lot better, come tell me afterwards.
Yeah, I've used fractal noise to be clouds, smoke, water, fire, all sorts of stuff. It really is. And then it's great for just stuff like this where you just need something to randomly twinkle or randomly turn on and off and just be generated procedurally, because you can just animate the turbulence on the fractal noise and just gives you a nice random pattern that you can dial in. And,
say Dave forgot to wave his hand at the light for the fireplace.
Yeah, exactly.
We could have done that.
I would have just sat there with my fingers just still.
Thank God we had fractal noise to come to the rescue. So let's see.
Question, Dave.
Oh, sorry.
Ambient light from our room here just bouncing around and influencing the shot. And the spill killer, it's pretty much magic as far as I'm concerned, because it just gets rid of it, like pretty much by enabling it. These are just default settings, and you click enable and it goes away, and that's all there is to it, really. And then in the light wrap, all you have to need to do, remember, keep in mind is you have to select your background layer as the. It's like this is basically, you can keep it as a guide layer too, like Dave pointed out earlier. Like I keep it on and set it as a guide layer, or you can just keep it off. It's just a matter of preference. Sometimes it's just, I like to keep it off so I don't confuse myself.
There's a special thing I want to mention about the light wrap here, this particular plugin. If you're ever using this, you got to make sure that your footage is the exact same size as the backplate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because if you don't, then it will it won't sample the right area. It's just the way that it works. It doesn't. It needs to know that the thing is in the exact spot. So if you had I don't know if I need to explain any further than that, but basically just make sure that your backplate that you're sampling from and the footage that you have, even if you have to pre-comp things, just to make sure that they line up, that you're going off of the same in 1920 1080.
Because in the under the hood, what happens is, imagine that you have your 1080 subject, right? And then your backplate is for some reason 4K. It would put it behind it, and it would only use the lower left side of it, or it's like in Nuke. If you don't set your composition before you start doing all your things in Nuke, if you don't set your size properly, then when you start bringing things in, it's going to do the exact same thing. It's just going to have this huge thing in there, but your window is smaller.
We know we had to call out this intersection right here. This is a very important intersection in Brooklyn, and the site is like right on the corner of it. So this is where it's at, and we needed to show that. So there's places where, again, we have like Barclays Center called out in its proximity to the City Point project. These graphics we're able to, like, again, in a stylistic way, talk about how their site sat on some of these other, again, very notable places. You can see we did a little bit of quick roto work to get this girl to kind of go in front of it there. Fun little things like that. Basically taking layers and in After Effects, masking them off, rotating them in the 3D space once we track the camera, just doing fun things like that. So as far as like high-level facts that we might want to talk about, you might want to talk about square footage or the phases of construction. So this shot right here was a cool little joint thing between Max and which I'm not all that great with, as maybe evidenced earlier, and then putting some stuff into After Effects. So I went in and I made an ISO camera of this massing model of this axon, and was able to just take a couple stills and animate them around and make a cool dynamic way of calling out the phases of the project and the square footage in a way that was a little bit different than just flashing text up on the screen. Because I think that something like this is a lot more appealing to take in as a message than just having to read through a book or just white text on dark backgrounds and such. So, and add a little bit of life to it too. And also to have cool things happen, like right there with the moving through making it look like it really is projected on there. And then we have things like, you may just want to communicate the vibe. So we have these little overlays. We have a term for this at Neoscape. We call them loco passes. Because it's just this crazy stuff that's just going on top. So you might take a logo or a piece of artwork and just kind of just mess it up and just do fun things with it, blink it on and off, and put weird transfer modes like we all experiment with in Photoshop, because I know that most of us never really know exactly what transfer modes do, but you just cycle through the ones until you find the one that looks best.
Always a crapshoot.
So those sort of things. And then animated logos. We talked a little bit about the logos and finding certain assets, but at the beginning you can see this sequence. So that just takes if you were to step through it frame by frame, you could see the ends being drawn on there with our little white line, with the Y there, and a cool sort of, kinetic typography sort of thing. I'm drawing the T on there, have it rotate out, and there's your branding.
When you have just a couple frames that you just don't quite look right, throw a loco pass on it.
Yeah, it's true. We recently for the South Street Seaport project, when we were we had to blend. I don't know if we blended 2 cameras in together or if we had to really jump ahead in time, but there was this part where there's 2 different cameras, and we just slapped a little bit of crazy sort of sleight of hand on top of it, and no one would ever notice it. And then just to show the end here too, the way that this wraps up at the end. So again, just a cool little, and these are just 2 examples of logo animation things that we've done. I mean, we've run the gamut of like 3D extrusion stuff, or taking and deconstructing a logo, and I mean, you name it, we have to think it up. All right, so I was going to talk about scene organization briefly. What I'm going to also do is I got to load up some stuff in After Effects here. There's as you might imagine, with the whole 3D side of things, I'm not going to go over all the steps of bringing in nulls and all that again. It's the same thing. I mean, we get camera data tracked in from the guys that will be using something more like PF Track or Nuke to do their tracking. They'll set their models up. They'll send their nulls to us, and then we can start putting messaging in things like hilly shots. So again, I think we kind of covered that earlier more. So what I'll do now is talk about our proof of concept stage that we did with this. And I will open up a two files missing. What's that? Loco pass? Let me just reconnect a thing here.
Anyone have any questions? Or
Yeah, Alex will answer your questions while I'm figuring this out.
how long did it take to complete a project? Well, I mean, that's the $1 million question. Depends how much time we have. That's how, we just recently, we turned something around in, what was it, 10 days, Carlos?
Yeah, this particular project, we already had done a lot of work for. Like I told you originally, we had done a more corporate kind of version of this film for some events that the client had. And for this one, so we had a lot already, all the 3D models, and we just had to tweak a few things. We went there and shot all the B-roll and the heli stuff we already had. Dave did, and the motion graphics team did most of the motion graphics. So I honestly don't remember, but we've been working on this project for a very long time. I mean, since 2012. And we did this, 2013, this particular version. If I would have to guess, this particular effort would have been no more than 4 weeks, because that's the high-end films are like from 10, 12, 18 weeks, and then we can do films that are 40 shot long in 10 days. It's just you have to bring resources in-house and work day and night, and what you need to do. You have to do what you have to do.
So in that calendar time, how many man hours can you throw at it? Do you have?
I'll give you one number, so that you can do the math. We talked about this yesterday. I think that we typically would like to think that a person can do a rendering in 40 hours. And this means not just 40 hours of continuous work. This means working, reviewing with creative directors and the client and all that. What's that? And hold on. Is that you, Jeff? So yeah, but for a film, we get budgets all the time. They're always different. Even for renderings, they're always different. So it depends on the size of the project, the size of the team that's going to be working on, and so we get budgets from when we have a kickoff meeting. They tell we get like, well, you guys have 1,000 hours or 2,000 hours for a film. So it can vary. It can be even less. So there's a point, like there's a breaking point on these things, right? Where it doesn't matter how many hours it takes. You're just gonna have to do it because there's an insanely short deadline. You just have to put as much as you can to get it done.
That's the ideal scenario, and that usually happens when you already have a relationship built, that you are given the budget. But when you're pitching a new idea, a video idea for a new client, usually what sort of budget do you calculate?
It's all based on it's all based on on the information the client has and how much they're willing to pay. We never really have those discussions live with anyone. We hear what they have to say, we come back, we see what we can do. Sometimes we can accommodate, sometimes we work backwards from what they say they can spend, right? And we try to accommodate as much as possible in that budget. Sometimes we just propose and we go nuts and we tell them this is how much it's going to be, and then they're like, oh, well, maybe it's a little bit too much. And we start chopping things.
Okay. So back to this proof of concept phase that we did. So we knew that from some of the documents that had been set up ahead of time, some of the conversations with the client, that we were going to be going out to New York. We were going to be doing a pretty extensive B-roll shoot. And along the way, Carlos and I had been talking and the team, and we were like, well, we got to kind of prove that these things work. And so let's do a couple tests. So as I showed you before in that Illustrator document, there was this map that was there. So I went in, I grabbed that, and I broke it out, and I brought it into After Effects. And I put it on top of some footage that I just went out and shot with a 5D Mark II. So I found an abandoned, or not abandoned, I found just a big blank brick wall that might be sort of similar to something you would see down there, according to some of our treatment. And we just did a little test. So this was all done, the entire thing was done in Illustrator and After Effects. There was no need to do any kind of, and I'll do a quick little, it might take a while. We'll turn motion blur off, how about that? And half res works too. So this was done using basically all tools at my disposal in After Effects, which goes to show that you don't, while having stuff like PF Track and Nuke are useful for getting real nitty-gritty tracking and all that, you can do with tools now that are available in After Effects, you can do a lot of this yourself in there. So this was we were able to just kind of do some quick little look tests to see what it would look like if we were to put a big map on top of a wall there. Oh, and then apparently a garbage truck hit something. So from there, and I kind of want to just show you quickly how, like, I don't say easy, but how you could do that yourself with some of the tools that are inside of After Effects. So if I had this footage, I made a new comp out of it. I can scrub through it. That's great. I can try, and sometimes this doesn't, I think Adobe would even tell you that this is not considered to be as accurate as the other trackers, but for motion graphics artists and people trying to do some kind of quick stuff, this works just fine. So you can track your camera, right, just by right-clicking on it and go to track camera. So right now this says it's analyzing in the background. The cool thing about this tool as well is that it can, you can continue to work on other things if you want to while that's happening. So you could maybe go in your map and start like taking your labels, and you could put an effect like a transition linear wipe on this. So we could drop a couple keyframes and we could be animating some of these things on and off while we're letting our thing track in the background. Up here, it'll usually give you this little percentage of 4 minutes. We can wait that long. It's just great, again, for sketching stuff in and getting the idea across. I mean,
Absolutely. I mean, we just pretty recently. This is a pretty recent addition to After Effects, and the workflow before. Again, we're going to reference the South Street Seaport. Pretty much last minute, we decided we want to throw some fireworks in one of the heli shots, and the heli shot was going to fly through, and I was like, well, we can go back to the tracking data, go to Max, export some cameras. I can put some nulls over there. Yada, yada, yada. And I was like, you know what, let me just try the new tracker. And it did a pretty good job, like almost like right, in 4 or 5 minutes. And it's like, it might not be perfect, and if you really boil it down to it, but when you're short on time, and you might just want to save time. It might be early on in the process. Be like, hey, let's see if this works real quick. And if it does, and it works fine, and you can't tell the difference, roll with it. And it's a great little tool, and like Dave says, it's probably not as accurate, to the meter or to the foot, or as other things might be. Depending on your distance from the subject, but it gets the job done really well in a lot of cases. So I find that it's before we even consider, for our purposes, for motion graphics purposes, asking a 3D artist for a camera or some nulls or whatnot, we'll just try the 3D camera, and if it works, we're done.
So I decided to trim this area a little bit rather than try and track the whole thing. I'm just going to see if it works with just 105 frames here. The one thing to note about when you are doing tracking, and I think Matt probably would have touched on this already, the same thing applies in here. Like having enough information, you need sort of either parallax, or you need certain things to be present. In fact, this shot may not even have enough of it. It'll track a lot of times, but it won't. You may not have the sort of depth that you may need, but you can still get things to stick on things fairly easily. Just let this.
And it's worth noting too that you can track 3D footage too. Stuff that came out of Max, 3D animated frames from Max. If you need to track that, I mean, we can also get the nulls and data from the really precise nulls and cameras from the artist. But it works just the same concepts apply. It'll pull a track from render frames.
Yeah, we had addressed that earlier. There was a question about like if it was good to do that ahead of time. We will do that when we need to, but it's certainly at our disposal if we need it. All right, come on, let's work. Solving camera. All right, so as you can see, got all these points here, and I can go and hover my mouse very easily over these things, and it's sort of just figuring out. And you can see it's in more or less the right perspective that it should be. So I could click on this. I could go create a solid and a camera. So now that thing will stick on. I could also do things like, I want to, the rotation obviously doesn't look completely up and down the way that it should, so I can maybe go in and adjust some of these values to make it look a little bit more appropriate. I could also just make a little bit of text. Say, CG School. There you go, Jeff. And I can turn that on to be 3D. Now, you'll notice that if I just turn that on to be 3D, it's going to be kind of weird because it's not set at that spot. Now, as again, going back to the question we had earlier, I could take the position data of this and the rotation data, copy these, paste those onto here. I could even turn this thing off if I want to at this point. Scale this up. I can then move this around a little bit. Now you can see that. There's that dumpster again, or whatever it is. So again, this was filmed with a 5D Mark II. There may be a little bit of rolling shutters in here that's sort of hitting it every now and then. But for most intents and purposes, that's a pretty quick way to get what you need.
So that was really how the proof of concept was put together. What else are we going to talk about? So we could probably go right into how we would set up our heli shots and how we would go about adding callouts into that. And the process is going to be very similar. Oh, not that. So this will, well, I don't have optical flares. Oh well. This would reference a couple shots here. You can see the way that this was set up. So there's a lot of layers in here. My colleagues know that I'm kind of layer happy. Well, I mean, I'm not happy that it has to be that way. It's just how it ends up. So if I were to maximize this, I've got a lot of stuff in here. I've got a lot of pre-comps, a lot of things happening. But the real stuff that matters is seeing that I have my camera here, which again has keyframes on it for each frame.
So we send the client a couple of clips of the voices of the different people that we think fits the description that was already agreed upon, and they choose, right? We choose together with the client, and so we book the time in a studio, and then we basically get on either go to the studio and record with them, or do it over the phone, which is very common, where they can actually just patch you through while the whole recording is taking place, and then you can directly talk to the talent that's in the booth and say, well, that sounded a little, too. Put more emotion here, put more emotion there, put more emphasis on this last, sentence. Read it again. Really, it's too fast. Or right there, do some edits. Get rid of that word so you can have options and different takes, right? So what you see there in the top represents that. These are all the different takes that Vasily took from all the clips and decided those were the good ones, right? And we had to get rid of a lot because otherwise the guy would be speaking throughout the whole thing. So you can see there's very few spaces here, 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 and here, right? And so the audio there, because it comes from a professional studio, it should be already very good, right? You can see the waveforms are good. They're not clipping. They're not going all over the top. They're also not very low. So you have what you need is pretty much what you get of an EXR or a well-exposed photograph. Same thing, right? You don't want to clip it. And then we get these tracks from online services, right? From Killer Tracks. What's the name of the other ones? There's many online services that you can buy stock music, right? From. So
Killer Tracks is the one that we go to most, though.
This clip in particular, it's an okay clip. So people, at home make music, they upload it, and that's the end of it. But many clips do come with a bad mix, or they're clipping. The audio is clipped, and then it's unfortunate because you're kind of reviewing these things online, and you're listening to like an MP3 sample of it, and you can't really tell these things until you actually bring it into a program like this and start seeing the levels of the clip. But in this particular case, they're good clips, and let's say just this little part in here. This guy actually came in like this, there. So that S, at the end was a little over the top. So it's very straightforward. You can literally grab this thing and normalize it by hand. It's slightly better, right? It still was a little clipped, but it's just the S, so it's not a big deal. So you would do things like that. Phrase by phrase is going to be different. Sometimes you're going to get audio that has noise in here where it's supposed to be silence, right? And in Audition, it's very, very easy to get rid of all that noise throughout the whole clip. You can sample that noise just as you would sample noise on an image and tell the program to get rid of all that noise throughout the whole clip. You have to be careful with it though, because it can get rid of some real audio, just as you have to be careful with denoising your images, because it can get rid of some detail. So it's the same logic applies to this thing. Just quickly, if you go to your effects, and then you go to, right? So in this particular film, I went with a lot of purples and oranges, and actually that reminds me of a tool you might want to use for this in choosing your colors or your color palette for your color grading. There's a website. Give me 1 second. I have it here. Well, there's a tool for Photoshop, right? That it's a plugin called Coolers or something like that. That it's pretty cool.
K-U-L-E.
This guy, Cool.
Oh, that's not it.
Coolers.
I don't know what that is.
That is a plugin. That is a plugin. It's a pretty cheap plugin that you can buy online. Google it.
People trying to figure out how many confusing ways they can spell color.
Yeah, and basically you can do what I want to show you here on this website is, I thought I had it in here, but it doesn't matter. If you just Google color palette generator, let's see.
It's a color.
So, but this is the guy that I use. This is the one that I like the most. So this is very cool because you can get the complementary colors, the triad,
Christmas.
right? So
I know personally, I never feel very comfortable with my color selections at all. So when I certainly like to get some little bit of help every now and then from tools like this.
So it's very nice, to have this reference, and then you can save this. We use it also for when we do renderings and you want to, set the tone or the mood. Choose the colors wisely, and use these. There's hundreds of these tools and websites and stuff like that. So that plugin, you install it in Photoshop, and then you have the exact same thing you see in here. Well, it generates you select your primary color, and it's just going to choose the complementary colors for you, and it's just you can go from there instead of having the blue sky and then the purple reflection of the sky and being all over the place. So going back to this guy, so without going too much into the technicalities of this, it's very straightforward in that I want to explain a little bit of. You're going to find, depending on the software, that the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights can be named offset, gamma, and gain also. So, and that is because when there were video, they're doing video color grading, they were using tools that were not really to do color grading, but they were misusing them basically and started to stylize video. Those settings came from there, or those names, offset, gamma, and gain, and they just stuck. And the circles with the colors in all the color grading programs also come from those devices, those physical devices that had their little joysticks and dials to, make sure that they had the right values, that video had the right value. What's the name of the I'll remember it in a sec. Yeah, there was a name to that. So it's video amplifiers that they were using to do these things. Is the telecine. The telecine that they were doing. So it was video amplifiers, and they were basically misusing them, and that's where all these things came from, right? So again, that's like the rules and broken rules, got applied right there. So these stuff, if you choose, let's say we chose our oranges and the blues, as is the most common one. You just basically want to make sure, you want to make your shadows blue. You want to make your highlights, towards the yellow. There aren't that many highlights in here. It's more. So I'm exaggerating, obviously, here to, see the example in there. But this is something that is really going to take time for anyone, but it's not that complicated. It's literally just dialing those guys in and out in there. You can also shift the hue of what you're doing there, right? So in my experience, it's been a whole lot of trial and error to get the look I want for a particular animation, and not that every animation we do has a particular look. You just want to make it look good. You want to add, that extra level of color or desaturation or saturation, like this. The City Point film was very Instagrammy looking, lots of orange and almost like duotone in a sense. So you play those. We play those things by ear, and we like to play with those things, right? So the final one was this guy in here. For whatever reason, we decided to do that at this time. We have the shadows towards the blue, the highlights towards the yellow in there, and a contrast. And it makes a dramatic difference, just those two little things in there. One thing then that is important is what's the next shot, right? And is the next shot going to have, what does it look like? Compared to this guy. So you're gonna want to go shot by shot and compare your first shot, the shot you had, the previous shot to the next shot, and even the next shot, right? So come to this guy, and typically the way I do it is you color correct the one shot, color grade the one shot, then copy and paste all those settings to the next one. If the shot was shot with the same camera, with the same settings, on the same setup, it's going to kind of get you almost all the way there. This particular case, it wasn't that wasn't the case, but it is, for all intents and purposes, the same thing. I'm still going for the blues in the blacks, and I'm still going for the yellow in the highlights. Then there's all these other settings here down here that I wanted to saturate it a little bit more in there. Change the saturation of the shadow too, or the saturation of the midtones. These by default are 100 in here. So you change those guys, change those values, you're gonna get obviously different results. So then we added some curves to it too. Let me just get rid of that split. Same thing, an S curve. You don't want to clip the blacks on this thing, but you can go a little darker here if you wanted to. It looks way darker on the projector in there, but I can actually see here on the monitor where the clock hits the table. So as long as you don't have pure black in there, you should be good. And in this particular guy, in this particular shot, you can see that it's not as saturated as this guy. And I was having a very hard time in Premiere to saturate it even more with the tools that I had in there. So I ended up adding a little bit of extra help with this little plugin in there to saturate it more. So you can see the difference there. Next shot, it's again different camera, different time of day, and you want to make sure that it has the same colors as these three guys in here. So that's how it looks like. That Nuke comp that I showed you earlier in the morning is this guy right here. And the only problem with this was that it was already clipped here in the white on this building. So there's not a lot I'm going to be able to do with this guy here on Premiere to fix that. You can fix it a little bit, but it's not going to be the ideal scenario. Also, it's not, it's not a big deal because that's not the building we're focusing on. These guys are going to be, and the cut would not show that much. These are just random shots that I chose. So same thing. We're gonna do some curves. Sorry, we're gonna do the three-way color correction in there. That's the difference. See how this changes a little bit. I couldn't get away only with the blue and the yellow on the highlights. I had to go with the yellow or the orange in the midtones and make the highlights towards the blue. So you're gonna have to experiment there. It's not gonna work the whole time, obviously, because they're all different. And so that's what that guy looks like, with and without. And then again, just play with these settings too. Not too much. I try not to play with them. I try to keep within the three-way color corrector in there. Then we have the curves. Exact same thing, except in this particular case, I did modify the red a little bit because I wasn't getting what I wanted to get. This is what it was looking like without it. And it was just a little bit of that red that made it look, in general, more or less like these guys. Just the warmer tones of the whole thing. So then there was a pure CG and some green screen people in there. That's when it becomes more complicated. Not more complicated than you have to use many more different tools. It's just harder to color correct a CG backplate with people, or color grade, however you want to call it. But regardless, it's the same thing. So you're going shadows, want to make sure that your shadows are going to the blues. This one, because it's more in line with the aerial shot, ended up doing the midtones also going towards the orange and the highlights going towards the blue. So this is a collection of almost 2 years of work, and we're work that we're very proud of, and literally all we share with you in these 3 days, it's what we do and how we achieve this right here. So here we go.